Hi there. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games, which this season is Dungeons and Dragons. And our guest today has great stories, I'm sure. Skip Williams. Skip has worked in RPGs for 40 years, including every edition of D&D from the very beginning up through third edition. He has worked on the third edition design team. He was also probably most famous for being the sage on in the Dragon magazine column where you could ask the sage. So I'm so looking forward to having Chris Skip with us. Why did I call you Chris? Skip? You can call me Bob. How's
Bob,
that?
there you go, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Oh, thank you, Skip, for being on our show today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here, Peter.
Okay, good. So how you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, weathering everything all right back there. And you're in Wisconsin now, right? You're in Lake Geneva, right? You're back to where it all began.
Well, I'm actually in southwestern Wisconsin these days.
Oh, okay. But you were in Lake Geneva, so let's start there. So I want to spend a little bit. I know you started working with D&D very early in your life, but what were you doing before you heard of D&D? But you were.
Before I heard of D&D, I was in school. That's a fact. Far back I go. So
you were in grade school, maybe.
Yeah, well, junior high.
Junior high.
I'm dating myself because that's middle school now. Right? Nobody goes to junior high anymore. It's middle school.
Right, it's middle school. Yeah. So how did it happen? How did you get pulled into D&D? What was your first experience with Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, how I got pulled into it was the local weekly paper, the Regional News, had a front page picture of was a battlefield with little tanks, and I always thought little tanks were pretty cool. So there's little tanks in the paper, and it turned out it was an article about Gen Con 6, I think, or maybe Gen Con 5. I don't remember.
Right.
So which had come and gone, and without me even knowing about it.
Oh, what a tragedy!
Really, yeah.
Fortunately, it came back next year, right?
It did, and so I was sort of primed by that. And then the next year at school, I ran into a classmate, Don Art, who lent his name to the Invulnerable Coat of Arn. Because Gary thought he was always afraid of taking damage. He did that a lot, actually. He had this little map. He was involved in some sort of a World War II type campaign. They'd been playing tactics, and he had it in school with him. So that's how I learned about the LGTSA, which was Gary's organization, and the organization that was putting on Gen Con at the time, because that was still before TSR existed.
Right, and before D&D, right?
Yes, slightly before D&D.
Right.
He was working on D&D at the time.
Right.
Actually, somebody I was in Boy Scouts with, Mike Menard, was an early playtester. I didn't know that either.
Right.
I did not discover that until years later.
Right. So you went. So did you go and play these games? Play basically miniatures games, war games somewhere.
Actually, the first real war game I actually ever played was D&D.
Okay.
Out and bought a copy of D&D off Don Kay's porch.
Okay. Don
Kay being at that time the recently deceased partner in what became TSR.
Right.
I missed him by a couple of months. And then because then time marched on again, and then I was in high school, and then there was another classmate, Marcus Kurowski, who I have not seen in years, who became a professional accordion player. That was the last time I saw him. He was on a break. He was playing the accordion at Horticultural Hall for a wedding or something.
So where did your first D&D game take place, and how did it happen?
It happened. It was in the halls of my high school, Badger High School, which is outside of Lake Geneva. Badger is what is known as a union high school. It's where several school districts get together and they build one big school.
Uh-huh.
After school with Marcus, who had an unusual way of, let us say, he's a big story guy. He'd be called a story guy these days.
Yeah.
He'd be the sort of guy who says the story is more important than anything else. He would be that kind of role player if he was still role playing today. I don't know that he is. Like I say, I haven't seen him in years or heard from him either.
Right.
So I was a one-on-one playing a cleric and getting lost in a dungeon, and I kept running into the same group of wights, which I kept turning as a cleric, and essentially ran around in circles in this dungeon for, I don't know, 2.5 hours or whatever, till the lake house came to get us back to town. So that was my first D&D game.
So, did you play it pretty regularly then? Up in take me up to you actually getting hired or joining in, working on at TSR or something, proto TSR, whatever.
So so about that time they had purchased Gary and Brian had purchased the house at Williams and Marshall Streets, and we're getting ready to open the hobby shop, and they were starting to hire people. And there was a school game club that did D&D now and then, and the GM there was the fellow who Joe Fisher. He was the fellow who wrote the original Ranger class. Okay. And my characters in Joe's game didn't live more than about one adventure. The whole series of it. I did a whole series of magic users that pretty much were one and out. But in the meantime, Gary and Duke Seyfried had put their heads together and done the Warriors of Mars game.
Okay, right.
They wanted to do Barsoom figures.
Yep.
So Gary and Brian Bloom put together Warriors of Mars, and I ran into Ernie Gygax, a former grade school classmate who had this Warriors of Mars in hand, and said, "Do you play games other than D&D?" And I said, "Sure, I'll try anything once."
Sure.
So we played the heck out of Warriors of Mars. We went all over Barsoom.
Nice.
Including, drove the team completely nuts because we were role playing and rolling dice when we should have been doing our homework. So we had one teacher in particular who was just completely he was just completely beside himself over the dice. He just couldn't. Dice meant gambling to him, so he thought we were running a floating crack game or something. He was just could not wrap his mind around anything being legitimate.
Yeah, it's interesting. John Jordan and I, who was a Wizard of the Coast, early Wizards person who worked a lot on the international business for Magic the Gathering at Wizards. We got in trouble in Italy for playing Magic. This was very early, just actually when Magic was being launched in Italy, for playing Magic in a cafe. Because same thing, it was considered gambling. Oh, you're playing cards. You can't play cards in public. That's gambling. Like, but these aren't like poker cards. These are like Magic the Gathering cards. Like, nope, get out of here before I call the cops. I'm like, oh, okay. So you're in good company, Skip. Right?
It happened.
Yeah.
So I remember briefly being the star of my geometry class because we were talking about platonic solids, and we had a little film about octahedrons and cubes, and I went, there you go. There's an octahedron right here.
Nice.
So that was probably the sole academic contribution D&D made for me, but so it goes.
There it goes. So
somewhere along in there, they opened the Dungeon Hobby Shop, and I got an after-school job there.
Oh, and so in the Dungeon Hall, for people who don't know, that was a game store, basically, right?
Oh.
Yeah, it's and so you're in high school still at this time,
Still in high school,
and working there, working at the hobby shop after school. So how long did you do that before you started working on the publishing side of things?
Quite a while, because I then finished high school and went on to college, and then my next job was to help out with Gen Con.
Oh, good. We know other people that work on Gen Con.
Just a few, yeah.
Yeah, just a few.
So yeah, while I was in college, I would come home on the weekends and work in the Gen Con office, and that's how I worked the summers.
Right. So what did you do for Gen Con? I mean, in terms of working on Gen Con, I mean, I know eventually you like ran Gen Con, isn't that right?
That's Joe Orlowski, the first full-time coordinator, was he left, and then I took the job. I was Joe's assistant, so I did everything that needed doing that Joe didn't have time to do. So answering the phone and licking envelopes, and a lot of typing, because we had no computer support whatsoever. Everything was on paper.
Right.
So I would sit there and look at event submissions, which were usually always handwritten on paper forms, and I would type them out one event per sheet, so that we could arrange them and send the typesetting in any order we wanted.
Right.
And in between that, they run to the post office to get the mail and answer the phone and
all that sort of good stuff. All the stuff necessary to put on a show.
Yes. Yeah. So all the pre-work.
Right.
Explain to people on the phone that no, you don't have a pre-registration brochure because nobody has one yet. It isn't printed yet. So.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I have fond memories of when the event listing was in Dragon Magazine.
Yeah, that was the big deadline, was to try to have that ready so they could be tipped into the right issue of Dragon.
Right. Yep, and it was fun. I of course could never go to Gen Con, being from a poor to middle class family out in the West Coast, but I would always fantasize about going, and I would fill out my event request as if I was going to go, but of course I wouldn't actually send it in. But just going through the events and saying, "Ooh, yeah, I want to play in this one. I'm playing that one. That looks fun." Yeah. So what was the next? So you did that for a few years, or what? How long were you working on Gen Con?
A couple of years, and then the company got into trouble, and that's been talked about. That's been talked about to death other places. The company got into trouble, and they had been busy hiring and trying to expand because they were hoping to capitalize on the company's exponential growth.
Right.
And then sales flattened, and then they had all this physical plant and all this payroll that they had to cut.
Right.
Out I went, and Gary went to the West Coast to work on the cartoon, which that was a good thing in the end, I guess, for him anyway, and for the fans. So then I was unemployed, and then it's like I can either burn a lot of shoe leather looking for a job, or I can start freelancing. So I started freelancing.
Yeah. So what did you do?
The first thing I did, there was a product. It was called Swords of the Iron Legion, and I edited that. It was supposed to be an adventure that used the battle system rules, which was the first D&D miniatures rules.
Uh-huh.
And they had all these designers who had done modules, and it was pretty clear that none of them knew anything about miniatures gaming. But they all did these scenarios with adventures attached, and I was handed a stack of manuscripts and had to try to turn them into viable miniature scenarios and put the whole thing together.
And about what year was this?
Say again?
And about what year was this?
Gosh, I don't even remember. 83, 84.
Okay, just putting it into some context, Yep, I was in college about then. So yeah. So you were so this was using Battle System, and so what did you do from there? What else did you work on?
Somewhere along there, Jean Raby came in as head of the RPGA, and she needed somebody to help her with Polyhedron. So I started doing that on a freelance basis as well every other month. And that was about the time I also started writing Sage Advice as well.
Yeah. So how did that get started? Like, how did you end up doing the Sage Advice column?
That was pretty much serendipity. They had a big pile of unanswered letters, and somebody at TSR decided that they wanted them answered. So they hired me at some, I think it was a per letter or per question basis, to just answer these letters, please.
Right.
So I sat there on my Apple IIe, and I had a letter quality printer.
Nice.
And I would sit there and I would answer a week's worth of mail, and then I would send all of that to the printer and go like shop for groceries because printers were that slow.
Yeah.
This giant daisy wheel printer, and I could literally hear the printer typing away at these letters from a block away. So
nice.
at that point, then Roger Moore was editor of Dragon Magazine, and he said, "I understand that you're answering questions, so why don't you write Sage Advice? Because I can't get anybody to do it regularly."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, well, here's an index of all the letters I've already answered, because I had been keeping that. Just I'm not sure why I kept it. I think just so I could find answers in case I ever got into duplicate questions. I could see what I'd already done."
So you must be like quite the expert on AD&D.
I was at one time. I've forgotten a lot of it.
So you can you explain the surprise rules?
Can I explain the surprise rules? Do you want the way they're played, or do you want the way that they're written?
Oh, the way they're written, Skip. Because nobody plays them the way they're written.
No, because you can't play them the way they're written. They're not playable. So the short version of the story is you're supposed to compare the die rolls, and you are either surprised or completely surprised, depending on how big the difference is. And the bad guys get up to 3 rounds of attacks on you.
Right. Yeah, it's like one round of attacks for every segment or every difference in pips, right?
Every type of difference, but I believe, I don't know if it's, I've never seen more than 3, so I don't remember if that's a rule or not.
Yeah.
3 was always, certainly, as I was telling people, it's never more than 3. But yeah, those were full attacks. So you got something like a gargoyle,
right? Yeah,
just 4 attacks in D&D, and you get, and it gets you completely surprised. That's 12 attacks from each.
It could shred a party.
Yeah, really. Yeah, so we can leap ahead to exactly how, when we were writing, that had a big, that whole controversy had a big effect on 3rd edition. I think you were part of that, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, perhaps.
Oh, I probably weighed in. Yeah, but
I don't remember exactly who was involved in that discussion. But I remember thinking about those days pretty hard.
Yeah. So I've gotten different answers to this question. I will see what your answer is. So did Gary Gygax, when he ran AD&D, did he use a lot of these interesting, detailed, miniatures gaming type rules that you find in AD&D, or is that something that slipped in somehow?
I never remember him doing any of that. We never played with minis.
Yeah.
With Gary. It was sitting around his living room or on his porch and rolling the dice. And there were no minis. So a lot of these really fine-tuned type rules, Gary never used those. Not that I can recall.
Yeah. Huh.
I don't ever recall when Gary was running. I don't ever recall being surprised or achieving surprise.
Huh. Interesting.
I don't even really recall him asking for initiative rolls. Now that could be the intervention of 40 years in there that was doing that, but pretty much he would describe the situation and say, okay, what are you going to do? And then the good guys went and the bad guys went, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Until it was done. I don't ever remember initiative rolling when Gary was running at all.
You think fondly on those days, Skip?
It was a simpler time, that's for sure.
Being such a, being part of such an important era of history for tabletop games. It must just does it feel surreal at times?
It does, because it's become a much different thing. I tell people often, when people tell me that they just discovered role playing, one of my responses is, you're going to have a great time, and I envy you a lot, because there's just I don't think there's any period of time where you enjoy the game more, just you get more pure enjoyment out of the game than about the first 6 months you're playing.
Yeah.
And then after that, you become sort of an aficionado. You become less of an enthusiast and more of a hobbyist, and you start slicing the bologna and paying attention to the thing and building min-maxing characters. Everybody goes through all of those phases. Your approach becomes much more analytical as you go, and you lose that wow fun factor that you have as a neophyte.
Yeah, I jumping ahead, I suppose, but when we worked on third edition, there was always this talk about and I think some of the D20 publishers that came in after we published third edition, there'd be all this talk about trying to capture that feeling of what it was like to play in the early days. And I always kind of think, I think it's more relative to when you start. It is that I don't know that D&D was better. The experience was necessarily better in any given era. The best era is the first 6 months, like you said, of whatever year that happened to be, right?
Certainly seems to be the case to me. I mean, just looking at social media, it seems to me that everybody's favorite edition is the first edition that they play.
Yeah.
Like asking people their favorite Doctor Who. Who's your favorite Doctor? Well, the first Doctor you ever saw, most of the time.
Yeah.
And you can become a serious Who-hite. You can really start to analyze, and you can make your top 10 list and all their fun stuff. But it boils down to, your first Doctor, the first one you ever saw.
Yeah. I think
Bond? Who's your favorite James Bond? It's the first Bond you saw.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so so you ended up working full time again at TSR sometime in the 90s. When take me up to that.
Yeah, so eventually they gave up and hired me back to work full time for the RPGA.
Okay.
But then I was editing the newszine all the time and working on tournaments. So that was
I mean, in addition to remembering you as Sage, I remember your name as someone who was very well known in the whole RPGA tournament circuit. Somebody who you designed a lot of the championship games, right? The RPGA Open, Adventures, and so on.
Yeah, D&D Open in there somewhere. A couple of D&D Opens in there somewhere as well. RPGA eventually took over the D&D Open as well. So think I did 2 of those, 2 D&D opens as well. Yeah. So yeah, and then I kept that up until I sort of got tired of being in the RPGA and said, you know what, I'd really like to move over to the design side.
Now, there might be people that watch this who don't know. The RPGA no longer exists, but the RPGA was for years and years the Role Playing Games Association. It was run by TSR, but it was not exclusive to TSR Games. I think a lot of people would argue TSR Games probably got a lot more coverage, but that might have been, was that also a function of how much other publishers bothered to try and get their games?
That was part of it. And the other part of it was just there just wasn't the player base. So I mean, we would go Gen Con and Origins were our 2 biggest shows every year.
Mm-hmm.
We did, I don't know, 15 or 18 scenarios at Origins and, 25 to 30 scenarios at Gen Con every year. And, 2/3 of those or more would be D&D scenarios. And we would have hundreds of players.
Right.
The other third would be non-D&D scenarios, and we would have a dozen players or less.
Right.
So there just wasn't the audience.
Yeah. Not a huge demand for Talislanta.
Talislanta. I don't know if we ever did Talislanta.
Well, there you go.
Well, we did Paranoia, and we did
Sure.
Call of Cthulhu.
I'm sure you did GURPS and.
Well, I don't remember doing GURPS, but we might have.
Yeah.
We did Ars Magica when it came out.
Do you know now? Are tournaments? I don't even know. Like in the current culture of D&D, are tournaments a thing? I don't know. Do you know?
Tournaments in the old RPGA style, I haven't seen any of those in forever. The elimination. I mean, there are team tournaments that are still done from time to time where whole teams advance. And there's a winning team declared. But the RPGA style where the best role players get voted into the next round, I don't think anybody's doing that anymore.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything like that in a long time. So, right. Okay, so where'd you go from there after RPGA?
So then I went, became, my title was designer editor. And at that time, TSR was trying to get a Buck Rogers play-by-mail game going. So they took one of their designers, Bruce Nesmith, who had a great deal of computer design has a great deal of computer design chops, and they put him to work on that project. And his whole schedule was then abandoned, was orphaned. So I came on and assumed Bruce's schedule. So I think the first project I worked on, the first project I worked on was the Book of Treasures or the Book of Treasure Maps, and they gave me that as a freelance project while I was still in the RPGA, and that was one of Bruce's projects. They just paid me on the side for. And then the next one was Van Richten's Guide to the Ancient Dead, which was the Ravenloft book about mummies.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first actual in-house design project that I did.
So what were we? Are we in the late 80s now?
This would have been 86, 87, 88, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So and then it was 32 pages of published material a month as either a designer or an editor for the next several years. So.
And what lines did you work on for the next several years? Is it mainly the D&D core line, or
D&D core line almost exclusively? I got lent out to Ravenloft once or twice. I was involved in getting Greyhawk resurrected.
It's 6:30.
I must have done some FR work in there at some point. I don't remember, but I must have. Some point.
Forgotten Realms.
Lent out to the Forgotten Realms at some point.
Yeah. What do you look back? Do you have any projects in that time that you look back and are really like, oh, I really remember fondly this particular project, or some story from that time, somebody that you got to work with that you really liked working with?
I don't know. I mean, one of the biggest ones I did was the Rod of Seven Parts. That was probably the biggest second edition piece I ever did, and that thing was massive. It went TSR's infamous 2-inch box,
Right?
Which was a lovely thing, except that the company wasn't selling it for as much as it was buying them for.
Well, that wasn't your decision, Skip.
That wasn't my decision at all. No, it wasn't. Not my fault there. But yeah, I remember that one in particular because for some reason or another, they became very concerned. The management became very concerned about what the output was like. So we were required to turn in our work. I think it was daily, but I think it was weekly. And it just so happened that I had spent a month and a half planning the project and was now then filling in the outline. So I always had reams and reams of paper to turn over.
Well, that's good.
Made myself look like a serious superstar there.
Oh, be careful. You're being set up for a sneak attack.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Is there a cat stalking me?
Careful. Don't get a sneak attack or backstab bonus. Let's stay AD&D backstab bonus from the cat.
Well,
so who did
third edition? He could do the pounce, and I get the claws.
Yes. Yeah. Claw rake.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So what? So who were you working for during those days? Who were you reporting to?
Steve Winter was the team leader for the core D&D group.
Yeah. Who, by the way, will be my guest in a couple of weeks. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I always wondered, like, how do you critique the writing of somebody who's writing a module?
Well, that's an extremely good question. I can only answer it from my point of view as an editor, and that is, does it work? Does the reader understand what the situation is? So many module writers, in my experience, don't understand the proper sequencing of their ideas. So. Now,
what do you mean by that? What do you mean by the proper sequencing of the idea?
I mean things like they will make references to stuff that they haven't told the reader yet.
Oh, sure.
Or they will somehow get it into their minds that they're Agatha Christie and they're writing a mystery module and they've got to hide the big surprise for the end. And it's like, you've got to tell the GM what's going on at the beginning. Or otherwise, the adventure is not going to run.
Right.
But beyond that, I mean, does anybody even know? I mean, how many modules get played? You and I had this conversation at one point, I think. How many modules get played versus how many modules get read? Is it more important for modules to be readable? Was it more important for them to be playable? I never got an answer to that question.
Yeah. Huh.
I tried to make them readable and playable as an editor. Or as a developer.
Hell, Skip, that sounds like a good answer.
Yeah, because if you don't hold their attention so that they can read it all the way through, then your chance
that's a fail.
It's pretty low. But
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I always kind of wondered, like if you have a group of people writing adventures, how much do people critique each other's work, and like how do people, how was it decided, oh, this person's really good at writing adventures, we should hire them more often? How much of it was grammar and syntax and delivering manuscripts on time versus like, Oh, that's a really clever plot twist.
On time, pretty important, and making less work for the editor was pretty important. My experience.
Right. So, take me up to when we started working together, 1997. What you were still working on the core D&D team, right? Up till the WotC acquisition.
Yes, so we had done we'd done the player's option and GM's option books, which were sort of the penultimate second edition accessories, just trying to add some of these wargamey elements or to get something to appeal to the really hardcore fan who wanted to push the envelope a little bit. So a player's option was playing around with the ability scores and messing around with the skill system, and I don't remember what else that was in really. And then combat and tactics was grid-based combat, and we had rules there for anything from flying creatures to chariots to cannons in there.
Yeah.
Wrestling and overbearing and trying to break out of that 1 minute the 1 minute melee round, which was an object of derision for quite some time. Right, because combat doesn't take a minute to exchange blows. Everybody knows that, but that was really a sort of a chainmail holdover anyway. So we reduced it to 12 seconds. I don't remember how we found 12. I don't remember how we settled on 12 seconds, to be brutally honest.
Well, 1/5 of a minute, right?
1/5 of a minute, that might have been it. That could have.
Yeah.
I don't.
A nice multiple.
Yeah. So we had these combat rounds versus melee rounds so trying to wedge that back into the system, add this extra stuff without really completely causing the system to capsize. And then we got those books out, and I worked on high-level campaigns.
No, now you're getting close to my heart. That. Yeah. Yeah, I think I could rival for just about anybody's claims on doing power gaming. We were over the top crazy playing our little group of pre-WotC gamers, sort of the circle of gamers that Wizards grew out of in Walla Walla, Washington, and we just were out of control. We were just bat crazy, out of control. Gods, PCs as gods. That's everything, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I didn't deal with gods per se, but trying to get out past level 20.
Yeah,
really what I was trying to do with that. That was probably the book I felt least qualified ever to work on, and would have been more than happy to do it all over again at the turnover time. But it turned out to be fairly popular, so I must have done something right with that.
Yeah, I think you did. So getting up to coming to Seattle, what was it like to pick up your life and move to Seattle for new corporate owners, new culture, all that stuff?
Yeah, moved 2,000 miles to a city I'd never even visited to work for a company that well, it was pretty traumatic. Penny had started selling Avon and had a pretty good little practice going, and she had a good relationship. She had a part-time job with a store owner in town and was really starting to feel comfortable, and didn't want to go. So yeah, there was a lot of tension. My mom once suggested that we could probably have traced our route by tracing Penny's heel marks.
Oh my gosh. I want to thank you, Skip, for not sharing that with me at the time. I would have felt so horrible.
Well, so it goes. I mean, yeah, we talked about it a lot, but but third edition, we knew third edition was coming, and that was sort of a big thing. So
third edition. What would you like to say about third edition? Working on third edition.
What would you like me to say about third edition?
Whatever you like. I've had Monty has been on the show, and Jonathan's been on the show. I think one thing I'll certainly say is that you are held in very high regard by the people that you did third edition with. Jonathan and Monty both really enjoyed working with you. How would you describe your time working on third edition? How do you describe it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I like a lot of it. I mean, we pretty much I made the transition, and we moved out there. I think it was one of the last people to move, as I recall. I don't remember if not the last person to move. I'm not sure exactly but we came over Labor Day weekend.
Okay, I think there's a couple artists that would arm wrestle you for the title of last one out.
And they're probably right. I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I remember sitting around and in a nearly empty building before finally packing up and going.
Oh, you mean in Lake Geneva, the former offices? Yeah.
And then trying to get my computer transferred. Yeah, there was so then we got there, and one of the biggest surprises for me was nobody at Wizards appeared to be aware of all the work we'd already done on third edition, which was quite a bit. And it's like, okay, well, we're starting from scratch. Well, gosh, we've been talking about this for a year and a half. We've got these plans, and that would seem to be news to everybody. So that was a little weird.
Wow. Yeah. I can imagine.
And we had even in fact looked at some of Wizards products, looked at Magic in particular, and said, this Magic game does this really cool thing. I think they call it templated text, and gosh, when they mean the same thing, they always write it the same way.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? We should do that for D&D.
Yeah.
So that generated an incident. It's like somebody sat down. I remember who it was. Somebody sat me down when I got to my desk at Wizards and said, "Let's talk about templated text." And I said, "Yeah, I think templated text is a great thing. Here's what we should do." And they went, "Huh, what? You guys don't do templated text?" And it's like, you're right. We haven't been. We should be. We've been talking about this for a while. I remember saying that a lot at the beginning of the beginning of the project. We've been talking about this for a while. So it took a while for the gears to mesh. Let's put it that way.
Right. And specifically what you ended up doing on the third edition design team, your primary responsibility. Why don't you tell us about that?
The book that has my name on it as the lead designer is the Monster Manual. And I'm not entirely sure how I turned out to be the monster guy. But I turned out to be the monster guy. But we all did big chunks of all the books. And Jonathan and I worked together a lot on the Magic system. Redoing the spells and writing the general rules. And
do you remember any meetings or discussions about elements of third edition that kind of stand out for you? Like, oh, this was an interesting time, us trying to figure out this aspect of the system and how we eventually got there, or
one thing that has always stuck in my mind is initially getting together and trying to make a change and understanding repeatedly that there was a whole cascading list of other changes that we had to at least think about first before we could make the change. And that happened a lot. Okay, so what are we going to do about whatever it is we're going to do? What we're going to do about class features? What are we going to do about, about the advancement rate? How fast characters get better? How do characters get better? Well, gosh, then we're going to have to consider experience awards, and we're going to have to decide whether we're going to award experience for treasure, and we're going to have to decide how much experience a monster is worth, and we're going to have, if we don't know any of this stuff, none of these changes are going to be meaningful.
Right.
I remember talking about sharing a family story. My dad was an engineer, electronics engineer for years and years, worked on the bits and pieces of radios and stereos. And they had a plant in Germany they were working with. And one of his colleagues bought a beautiful Black Forest cuckoo clock.
Uh-huh.
This beautiful ornate thing with all the gingerbread, and he shipped it home, and his wife got it out of the package before he got home, and she didn't know anything about cuckoo clocks. And the thing about a cuckoo clock is if it winds down, the cuckoo comes out.
Right.
So if you have all the old Warner Brothers cartoons where the clock spikes and the cuckoo clock pops out, that would happen if you broke a traditional cuckoo clock. Well, she didn't know that, so she had it up on the wall, and the cuckoo came out.
Yep.
And she kept trying to push it back in, and the cuckoo kept coming out. And by the time my dad's colleague got home, the cuckoo clock was spread out over the dining room table. He had taken the clock apart, and there was no chance of putting it back together because it was all spring loaded.
Right.
So you remove a piece, that would all fall apart. And working on D&D, the third edition, what was like that? Everything was meshed together, and all these little pieces were propping all the other pieces out. So you pull out a block to make a change, and the whole structure fell. And then it's like, what are we going to do now? And that happened a lot.
Yeah.
So that's how we wound up writing like little pieces of the rules. We did a lot of that. We wrote little pieces of the rules, and we tried to play with those. So let's write this piece of the rule that we're worried about doing now, and then let's put together these kludgy little things that we think are going to be all the related rules. And a certain executive at WotC found that pretty frustrating, as I recall.
Oh,
like, what are you doing with all of this stuff? What is this? This isn't ready. What are you doing? What is this? What? It's like, well, it's what we've got right now. We got this thing that we're playing with today, and we have these other things that this thing needs.
Yeah. So that was me. Is that you're talking about me? Was that the certain?
Wasn't gonna mention any names.
you can mention names if it's good or if it's about me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can say, you could be rough on me. I can take it. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of that, boy, and that generated a lot of tension. But there was no help for that.
Yeah.
We couldn't rewrite the whole game at once.
Yeah. Well, I just have the fondest memories of our time together working on third edition Skip. I look back and think, oh, it was so much fun. Like all those meetings we would have where we'd sit in the lounge and for better part of an afternoon, and sometimes I'd fall asleep while you and Jonathan were going at it about something,
There we go. Well, you had that cubby hole right near the front door. I remember going and having informal meetings there.
Yeah, we would meet there. It was kind of out of the way, and it had big windows. You could see outside. You could see anybody coming out of the building, but it was kind of dark over there. People wouldn't really know you were there unless they kind of went out of the way and looked over there, right? And it was fun. I remember very distinctly. What's that?
There's a cushy little couch right there.
Yeah, the cushy little couches, little area. We sat many afternoons sitting there debating the nuances of what third edition D&D rules should be, you know, and you know, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry that we didn't pay a lot of attention to what the work had already been done, but you know, you gotta, you know, acquiring Dungeons and Dragons was like getting the coolest thing in the world. You had to jump in, you know.
Well, you had to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So, and since it was two groups of strangers coming together, a big hurdle was, okay, what are we going to do with the game, right?
Yeah.
And that's we know now. We certainly know now that those decisions were pretty momentous. Because third edition is really, if you think about it, not all that much different from first edition and second edition. Not really.
Yeah.
But fourth edition and fifth edition are lots different.
Yeah. Well,
so
yeah, I feel like fourth edition went way off into the weeds, and fifth edition brought it back a little bit closer to, you know, the orthodoxy. You know,
well, yeah, we could spend a couple of hours talking about that, but the fact of the matter is, agreeing on what the philosophy ought to be, that was momentous.
Yeah. So, you know, we're getting close into the hour. What have you done? What have you done since those days? Since how long were you at Wizards? When did you leave?
Gosh. Well, it was in the fall. Yeah,
that's okay. It's probably around 2000, 2001, 2002.
2000 or 2001.
Yeah, about the same time I did. So did you yeah. So sorry.
It was after you went.
Okay, I left in early 2000. So yeah. So you went back to Wisconsin. What have you been doing for the last 20 years?
I've been working for some of the small publishers.
Yeah.
This and the other thing. I work with Hammer Dog and I work with Frog God and.
Yeah. What have you enjoyed? Anything you'd like to tell us about? Talk about that you found particularly interesting?
Well, you know, the big thing that I picked up since coming back here is Gary Gygax. So I've been living and breathing that quite a bit. So
yeah, good job. I mean,
kind of hard to think about anything else when my life's been full of Gary Gygax.
Yeah, well, that's I discovered Gary Gygax kind of late. I think it had been going for 5 or 6 years, something like that, before I knew about it. And Stefan Picorni was like, Peter, you gotta come to Gary Gygax. Like, okay, what's Gary Gygax? You know, Gary Gygax, huh? So, yeah, good. I think that's a great idea. Great convention. Really glad that to have seen Luke step up as sort of the heir apparent to the Gygax family name and do this. So good on you for helping him out.
Yeah, it's been because this year, of course, was just really horrible, but so it goes, you know. I mean,
yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a bad year for many conventions. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we're
tough time and whole lot of uncertainty. So,
yeah. So, yeah, we're still trying to get our arms around what it means for Gen Con. What it not only, you know, certainly looks like hard to imagine the conditions will be optimum for by late July, but we'll see.
yeah, GaryCon was small enough. We were able to take it. We were able to take it largely virtual, so we were able to deliver something to people.
Yeah, yeah. So what do looking back over such a long and illustrious career that you've had in role-playing games, especially TSR products, what do you look back on as sort of it makes you feel the best? Like what have you taken away from all this?
Well, it's tough not to feel good about third edition. It's still got thousands of followers. It's spawned its own little imitation game. I mean, it's probably the wrong term, but Pathfinder certainly has its Pathfinder third edition reskinned.
Yeah.
It's got a life of its own and is very, very much alive. So
Yeah. Yeah, I share that assessment, Skip. I look back and I think it's I feel very proud of what we did with third edition. It was certainly a lot of fun for me as a uber fanboy. It was like a dream come true, kid in a candy shop with a brand new toy sort of thing. Hopefully I wasn't too annoying about that, but it was for Wizards there were so many aspects of Wizards that I felt like for me that like, well, I'm really lucky here. I met Richard Garfield. Richard Garfield ends up designing this amazing game, and so for me the to be able to for us to be able to acquire TSR and continue it and come out with a great edition, it's a much more personal accomplishment, for me in some ways. Well, anything else you want to say or share before we go off the air, Skip?
no, we've covered it. We pretty well covered it all. I do have a project I'm working on now, but unfortunately, it's too soon to talk about. I should probably mention the Embers role-playing game, which is an interesting little story.
Yes, please.
Embers is brand new, and I work with a group of kids, put that in quotes, 20-year-olds, got together in Scandinavia and Germany, and they got funding from the European Union.
Oh my goodness!
To do a role-playing game. They sold it as cultural content.
Wow!
And these guys got together and they pulled in material from Norse myth and Finnish myth and also Laplanders, and did essentially a post Ragnarok role-playing game for Northern Europe. And they got together and said, okay, well, how do we make this into a game? And one of them was somebody I knew from my D&D days, said, okay, well, talk to these guys and see if we can create a game. So that is being run currently in Europe as essentially like D&D Adventurers League is. It's all shared adventures.
Right.
So
now, are you involved in this in some way?
Well, I ultimately wrote the game for them.
Oh, great! Well, excellent. Okay, Embers. Is it EMB?
Embers. Yeah, I can send you a link if you. Yeah.
Is it EMBERS?
Yeah, EMBERS. Embers. Yeah.
Okay. Well, people.
World Tree is Burning. That's their tag. Right.
World Tree is Burning. Oh, that's great. Well, good. That's great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Skip. That wraps up another episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison. Thank you, Skip. Our guest next week will be Ed Stark. In the meantime, stick around this evening for Westgate Irregulars, local authors playing D&D in their world at 6:30 p.m. On Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific time, we have table takes. At 3:30, we have roundtable discussions. On Monday, we have board games with the Murph at 6 p.m. and the Brothers Murphs, excuse me. And on Wednesday, 9 a.m., we have minis with the Murphs. And then at 11 a.m., we'll have board games with This Game Gets Dicey. And then at 4 p.m. next Wednesday, I'll be back here on Fireside with our guest, Ed Stark. Also on Fridays, check out our podcast. We have on Friday, we'll have the release of this week's episode of Fireside, and archives of History of Magic releases will release on Monday. Please remember to follow, subscribe, turn on your notifications, say good things about us. And if you miss a show, you can find all of our streams on YouTube just one day later. So thank you very much. Thanks, Skip, for being with us. Thanks to our technical director, Marcus Mays, our streaming manager, Lauren Bond, our producer, Derek Guter, and thanks to Gen Con TV for streaming us. And thank you for watching.